I will continue on with the series. I don't know, it may not be. Okay, so today is my monthly wrap-up. I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of February. I have 12 books that I read this month, and unfortunately, my ratings were all over the place, and unfortunately, I already have a 1 star. And I did post on my community tab yesterday if you guys wanted me to continue doing my wrap-ups like normal, starting from lowest, working my way up to the highest, or if you guys wanted me to try out chronological, here's the first book I read, then this, then this, then this. And it was almost split evenly with a good amount of votes for my cat. But chronological did win by a little bit, so I'm filming this one chronological. And then since it doesn't really seem like there's a massive majority of people who want it one way or the other, I'll just decide after this one how I want to do it in the future. So the first book that I finished this month is a book that I had started last month and then carried over into this month, and that was Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Obviously, I loved this. This has always been one of my favorite Harry Potter books. I know that it's one that a lot of people kind of consider a bridge book, don't really feel like a lot happens. I disagree. It's certainly a more slow-moving book, and a lot of the progress that we make in this book is more subtle, and it is something that pays off over time as opposed to immediate rewards. But I love that about it, and plus Dumbledore, despite his flaws, because he certainly has them, Dumbledore is a fantastic character on page, and I really, really enjoyed the dynamics of him and Harry together, which is really nice to have leading into book 7, where Dumbledore, you get a little bit frustrated with him when the kids are finally having to do things and you realize how ill-prepared they are. The next book that I finished this month was another book that I carried over from last month, started last month, finished it now, is Malazan Book 2. This is a series that I don't really know if I like it yet or not. I think I definitely liked this one more. I feel like the writing was a little bit better, and I enjoyed following these characters, even though it was very sad in parts. It was still overall a more enjoyable read for me than the first one was. But still, it's such a confusing story. This author makes no attempt to help you understand his world, and it is a massive world. So there's a lot happening that's very, very interesting and that has me really excited to keep reading. And then there's a lot happening that just genuinely doesn't make any sense yet. And it seems like Malazan fans regularly say, yeah, you're supposed to be confused at this point. It's okay that nothing makes sense. It's not supposed to make sense yet, but eventually it'll all start coming together and it'll be amazing. And that's swell. I am taking this series step by step. When I reviewed this one on Goodreads, I had a comment asking if I'm going to read all 14 books or however many books there are. And I'm not making that commitment at this point. At this point, I'm reading book 3 next, and that's what I know. Next book I finished is She Came to Slay. So this is about Harriet Tubman. This book didn't just focus on her accomplishments in the Underground Railroad. We started with her as a very young child. We started with the family that she grew up with and the life that she had as a kid, moved on to her marriage, and then the beginnings of the Underground Railroad. We saw her as a war hero. There were so many things that she accomplished in her life, and there were so many little moments that were so inspiring. Not only was she this grand, incredible person who accomplished huge things and saved many lives, but there were also these little moments where she would take these more subtle blows, and rather than standing up for herself, she would choose to just take it because she didn't want to draw attention to herself, because she wanted to be able to help more people by continuing to be someone not looked at enough. And not only were her actions inspirational, but her mentality and her inner strength of what she put up with was also unbelievable. And then the tenacity and the I don't care anymore sort of mentality she had when she got older and she was like, I'm done with this. I loved this book. The next book that I finished was The Rage of Dragons, which was so good. I do have a dedicated review for this. I'll link it in the corner and down in the description. This is a fantasy that's focused on Tau. And Tau lives in this place where there's been a war going on for hundreds of cycles. And it's in this world where 1 in every 1,000 women can call down dragons, and 1 in every 100 men can become these sort of brutes of fighters. So this is definitely a military fantasy. There are so many battles and fight scenes. This is definitely a revenge story. Tao is very motivated by revenge. So I know that some of those things may be a turnoff, definitely know that going in. But I loved this book. There's great friendships in it. The sword brothers that Tao fights with are incredible. I really enjoyed his relationship with someone, with his love interest. Watching Tao rise up in the ranks and train and sacrifice so much to be the strongest he can be was amazing. And then where this book left us off is a place that leads me to believe that there's lots of room for the world to expand and hopefully for Tao to grow as a character too, so that he's not solely motivated by revenge. Next book I finished was The Unveiled, which is a self-pub book. This is a book about a sprite who lives in this elven world where they're very comfortable, very wealthy, I guess, and they love dresses and ceremonies and nice things. But our main character just loves the forest and the wild earth, and while she's exploring the forest one day, she sees these yellow eyes, and that kind of unfolds her having to prepare the city for this big event where the city's going to be vulnerable, and she just kind of has to save everybody. So unfortunately, this wasn't for me. There were a couple of things like the writing wasn't ideal. A lot of the wording choices were very odd and kind of drew me out of the story because they didn't seem to fit. They felt kind of unnatural and very stilted dialogue, stuff like that I didn't love. But then the story itself also just really wasn't for me. I think that it was a fun lower YA, maybe middle grade coming of age story. And I'll probably go ahead and let my niece borrow it because it's more geared toward the younger age of YA. But I just didn't really connect with it or feel much for it. But I'm not gonna rate this one on Goodreads because it is a self-pub book and I don't really want to hurt the author's rating just because the book wasn't for me. But if you have a younger reader that might be interested in it, then I would pass it on to them. The next book that I finished this month is Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. So this is a young adult novel. It follows David, who, we're in a world where epics exist, people with very specific abilities and powers. And David is obsessed with epics because an epic killed his father and he wants to take them down. He teams up with this crew of other people that are also trying to take them down. David is able to be a great asset because he's spent his life observing the epics and deducing what their specific weaknesses are. This was a book that was really fun to read, really easy to read. It was a really fast-paced, fun book that I had a really good time with. I did call a lot of stuff in the end and none of it was correct. So that was really surprising because it kind of felt like I knew the direction the book was going in and it went in a really different direction, which I really enjoyed. Overall, this is probably my least favorite Sanderson book that I've read so far, but that's not necessarily an insult because I still really enjoyed reading it. I just felt like it was more of a fast-paced, fun read and less of this big epic story, at least at this point. I will continue on with the series. I don't know, it may not be... I will continue on with this series. I don't know if I'll continue it on right away or if I'll give myself a little bit of time, but I'm definitely going to continue on. Several people have said that it just gets better as you go on, so I'm excited to keep reading. Next book I finished is the fourth book in the Robot Detective series by Isaac Asimov. So this finishes off this series for me. And I have given every book in this series 4 stars. It's been a really good time. I enjoy it. I really love Asimov's use of robots. I've had a great time. I really don't have a lot else to say because I have a whole classics wrap up dedicated to me talking more in depth about the classics that I read every month. So I'll just link that in the corner and down in the description if you want to hear more about it. Some other classics that I read were the Yellow Wallpaper and Of Mice and Men, both of which are also in the classics wrap up. So even though I'm not talking about them chronologically, I'll just direct you that way if you want to hear more about my thoughts on those. But the Yellow Wallpaper was phenomenal. It's written as someone's real life what happened to them when they were diagnosed with depression and forced to have solitary confinement as their treatment, and it was horrible and it only made what she was going through way worse. And it's written in a way that is a horror essentially, but also very, very real, and it was incredible. And then Of Mice and Men is I mean, it's a tragedy. It's meant to be a rough read. No one's supposed to enjoy reading it, but a lot of people come away loving it, and I did not. And I'll just leave my thoughts over there for that. The next book that I finished this month was The Last Argument of Kings, which is the third book in the First Law trilogy. It's an incredible trilogy. It is grimdark fantasy. It's definitely dark, so if you don't like dark fantasy, this isn't it for you. But if you love character work, if you love compelling characters that are dark and do really horrible things but still have traces of humanity in them that makes you still want to follow them and still kind of hope for the best even though they don't deserve the best. This is such a compelling book filled with characters that are so layered and so deep and so fun to follow, yet so horrible to follow. It's a really dark world, but it's one that's really easy to spend a lot of time in, if that makes sense. I loved the First Law trilogy, and I really, really highly recommend it. And even though this is a trilogy that really doesn't have a strong driving plot in any of the three books, the third book does bring things together in a way that's so satisfying. Next book that I finished this month was book 8 of the Wheel of Time series. I am in the part of the series that is a lot slower and a lot less development, or at least a lot less blatant development in it. This was definitely the hardest one to get through that I've read so far. I'm currently reading book 9, and I'm enjoying it much more than book 8, so at least there's that. But book 8 was a tough one for me. I am kind of speeding through this series now because I'm going to JordanCon, and I'm going to try to finish the series before I actually go to JordanCon, so I'm putting a lot more focus in the month of March and the first half of April on this series, and I'm already almost done with book 9, and I'm excited to get to books 11, 12, 13, and 14. And unfortunately, I finished my month on a book that I did not enjoy, and I'm sad to be talking about, because it's a book that when I had it on my TBR, I had so many comments of how excited people were for me to read it because it's one that they grew up reading, and so they thought that I would love it. And it was Dragonflight. I wanted so badly to love this with you guys, but I didn't. I just really, really didn't. I did give a very detailed review over on Goodreads, so for those of you that care, follow the link in my description to my Goodreads and check it out. But this book was not great to read. The writing isn't great in it, but that's something that I pretty easily overlook. The character work also wasn't great in this book. The main character did start out pretty great. She was the only surviving member of her family. She grew up having to disguise herself and having to be really scrappy and strong and brave. She was great until she was taken away from her home and everything that she had, forced into this life and forced into this relationship that was atrocious. And she essentially became the shell of the human that she once was. And in general, I think it was a fast-paced, really exciting plot, really easy to read, and I can see, if you grew up reading this, I can see how this would be a really fun book to read at a younger age when some of these things might fly over your head. But as an adult, it wasn't well written, the character work wasn't great, and the overall themes of this book were genuinely horrible. I'm really, really, really sorry to be saying this because this is a book that so many people love so deeply, and it makes me sad to not love it too, but I really didn't like it. And if you want to know more mild spoiler or big spoiler details, go check out my Goodreads. So those were the books that I finished this month. I am currently reading Harry Potter book 7, as well as a couple of other books, but those will be coming up soon to talk about. I'd love to chat with you more about these books if there's any that you are planning to read, excited to read, that you hope to read, that you're really sad that I read. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.